All right. All right, so as we kind of transitioned last week from the physical brain to the kind of ethereal, hypothetical mind, right? And now we're going to start looking into processes. How do we? Well, we've talked about how we get the information into our senses, into our brains, right? And then you read about how we start formulating ideas and thoughts and how that produces reactions and emotions. So all this stuff starts to come together earlier on, right after birth. We start to develop a sense of the world around us. And I know your book covers a couple theories, and we're going to go through at least 2 or 3 of them in this class. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about Jean Piaget. So Jean Piaget was he was really considered the father of developmental psychology, because he started theorizing how children start to take those senses in from the outside world and start to develop kind of their own little world of physics, if you will. Okay, so that was really his biggest contribution to the field. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some of the practices, some of the principles that he developed here at the end, just to make sure. But I want you to really get a good understanding of what stage development looks like versus continuous development, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. Okay. And Jean Piaget, by the way, was stage development, maybe. There we go. All right. So cognitive development, pretty much a book definition, is how we acquire the ability to learn, think, communicate, and remember. So these are theories that really start again from birth, and it can span through a lifespan. Now, Jean Piaget is very specific, and he only covers up to about early adulthood, late adolescence, early adulthood. And then we have other theorists like Erik Erikson, who will kind of push the boundaries and go through the lifespan of an individual. So Jean Piaget was mostly concerned with how we look at children and their growth. Now, why do you think that's important? Why do you think we would spend so much time talking about children and their growth?
Because it shapes who they are going to be as an adult.
Say it more time.
Because it shapes who they're going to be as an adult.
Right. Yeah. So really, how a child develops earlier on could impact how they're going to be later on in life, how they're going to get a job, how they're going to learn a new job, how they're going to go to college, right? Can you imagine, for example, if you skipped your entire adolescence or entire childhood and then went right into college, right? That'd be a pretty difficult task, because what skills are we lacking?
Basic skills like you learn in high
Right.
school.
Talking, reading, writing, those things, really, we develop those earlier on. And if we don't promote them earlier on, then that could bite us in the end, right? All right. So with the theory of cognitive development, we have really 3 different domains that not domains, 3 different factors that we look at. Now, as I explained, Jean Piaget is a stage development. Now, that's a little bit different than a continuous development, okay? Because stage development happens in very distinct stages. So, for example, what do I mean? I guess the best way to illustrate this is to consider like a butterfly. Like, we have a caterpillar that goes into the larva stage, goes into the cocoon, and then eventually becomes a butterfly, right? Those are very distinct stages. And that's what Jean Piaget really promotes. He thinks that things happen sequentially in stages. Now, continuous development is a little bit different in that it looks at things just happening, not necessarily in stages, but through a sense of growth, if that makes sense. So like maybe a tree, we don't have a tree that really turns into a sapling and then the next day it turns into a redwood, right? It doesn't happen necessarily in stages. It happens through time and through nurturing and through growth. Okay, so that's really the difference between stage development and continuous development. And again, when we look at Piaget, he is very much a stage development theorist. Okay. We also have a difference between domain general theories and domain specific theories. And your book talked a little bit about that. Really, the only thing I want to highlight about that is that when we think of domains, we think of abilities, if you will. Okay, so we might have which of you, do either of you like math? No? Okay, okay. So in that domain, your mathematics skills might be not as well developed, or you don't have an interest to that, right? So that would be one domain. Whereas maybe you like to write, or maybe you have higher language ability, or it might be morality versus logical thinking, or something like that, right? So those are really domain specific theories. So with our theorists that we're going to talk about, some of them look at maybe these domains develop differently, right? For example, both of you said you didn't really prefer to have math, right? It's not a strong suit of yours. So that domain has not really been developed. Whereas maybe your language abilities, maybe your writing abilities have developed, okay? So domain general theories just considers that domains kind of just improve or increase as they naturally would, and not necessarily in different levels, like domain specific. Does that make sense? All right. And then the third factor we look at in some of these theories is differences in proposed source of learning, causes of cognitive development. So there could be biological factors that affect us, right? There could be cultural factors that affect us. So it just really depends on the environment, and that's based how they. And when we get into Eric Erikson, we'll talk more about that, the psychosocial development, okay? Because it is still cognitive development. We still consider that a portion of cognition, but it's not necessarily. It's really based on the culture that the person's brought up in. All right, so Jean Piaget, he was with us for almost 100 years. He died back in 1980. He's been around since the 1800s. And again, we really considered him the father of cognitive development, because he was really the first to propose something. And interestingly enough, he did it through the observation of his own 3 children, which I thought was kind of cool. So he looked at his children and how they, from birth up until adolescence, just to kind of observe and see how they were functioning, how they were acquiring, again, that outside world into their brains and doing something with that, right? So he was really the founder of cognitive development and developmental psychology. He was a stage theorist, which I talked about. So there are distinct stages, 4 of them to be specific, which I'll go through here. And he was domain general, which he just believed that learning happened on an experience base, just based on what that child was encountering in his life at the time, his or her life at the time. So anyway, so stage theorist and domain general. So just kind of keep those in mind, because I believe that's on your quiz for this week. All right. One of the coolest things he really coined is he looked at children as little scientists, right? They're out in the world, they enter this world and they start acquiring knowledge. Remember when we talked about we're born with how many neurons? Does anybody remember about approximately? You got 200 billion. So yeah, you're very close. And then we end up with what? At the end of life, you remember the 10% theory? What's that? Yeah, about 10%, right? Yeah, because of pruning and all that stuff. So anyway, children are born with these raw building blocks, a huge amount of raw building blocks and raw materials to fan out those neural pathways and start developing themselves as emotional and human beings. So in order to do that, what Piaget was proposing was they were able to go through these stages based on what they were observing through adults, through the world around them, through, we talked about that we kind of develop our own little form of physics, right? Because we know as infants, what happens when you fall? Yeah, you fall down, you get hurt. So what do you try not to do? try not to fall. You have this concept of gravity, right? So before we even take our first kindergarten class where we learn about gravity, we already know it. We already know that the light comes from the sky. We already know that if something disappears, it might come back, right? Because we've seen that through repetition. When we get into learning, this will make a lot more sense as to why we view things. But anyway, children as little scientists, they're constantly experimenting. And when we go through some of these stages, we'll kind of show you how they do that. All right, so his theory of cognitive development, as I said, it happens in 4 different stages. First one we have is a sensory motor stage. The second is the pre-operational stage. The third is the concrete operational stage. And then the fourth is the formal operational stage, okay? So we're gonna go through these one by one. And again, if you notice, these are stages, right? So it's very stage specific. All right, so the sensory motor stage, just as it sounds, you know, we're doing what? We're moving things around with our hands, we're putting things in our mouth, we're touching, we're feeling, we're very tactile driven in this stage. And you probably noticed that kids do what? Little babies do what with toys? Yeah. Absolutely, they eat them. They sometimes they'll try and swallow them, right? That's not, again, they got to learn not to do that. But this stage happens from around 0 to 2 years of age, and that's where really the world is experienced through their senses and actions. And what better way to learn an item than to put it in your mouth and you know, get a sense of what the shape and the density and all that stuff is. But that happens again from 0 to 2 years of age. Now, with it, and I'm going to talk about a lot of these stages, especially when we get to Erik Erikson. He has stages and ages assigned with them. These are not hard and fast rules. These are just kind of suggestions. So for example, if you have a child that hasn't really mastered object permanence, which I'll talk about in just a minute, hasn't mastered object permanence at the age of 2 years old, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, okay? There might be some kind of developmental delays we want to watch, but you know, some children, they're going to achieve these stages a little quicker. Some of them might take a little bit more time. But it helps us with understanding if they're not meeting certain milestones at a certain age. So about 2 years old, we're going to start asking questions. Well, maybe why is little Billy not able to pick up that when things disappear that they reappear, right? So we'll start asking the questions and then seeing if there's some kind of explanation as to why that's occurring. So around this age, and as we get really through all these stages, we start to develop mental representations. So let me give you an example. If I tell you to think of a tomato. How many of you have that image? Okay, you know what a tomato is, right? Okay, describe a tomato to me. Okay. Okay. All right. So how do you know that? Where do you? Okay. So, and they have tomatoes at Walmart? Oh, really? Oh, the super Walmarts, right? Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, I don't spend enough time at Walmart apparently. So anyway, you were able to do that because you've had experience with tomatoes. You've heard that object, that red object with the green stem, called a tomato, and now you have that pictured in your head. That's mental representations, and we develop that, and it becomes more and more intricate over time as we have more experiences with the world around us. Okay, and interactions with other. So what Piaget was proposing is right around 0 to 1, maybe 2 years old, children lack that mental representation because they haven't learned it yet. They haven't really understood. They haven't had an interaction with the tomato before. They haven't put it in their mouth. They haven't torn it apart or whatever, tried to eat it. So that mental representation has not really been fully developed yet, according to Piaget. So what this leads to is a lack of object permanence, which Jean Piaget described, is when something disappears, it's gone. Okay, and you see that with children. I think I have a video. So object permanence is just essentially when it's out of our sight, we don't understand at that age that it might be somewhere else. It's just gone, poof, vanished into midair. So hopefully I put these videos in here just so you can so we can demonstrate. I figured out a way to embed these in. Oh.
For like you. Escape is spending time with the family. You're together, wait. Murmur.
All right. So this.
What do you think there? Like a yummy giraffe.
So what happened? What's going through that child's mind right now, do you think?
Oh.
So when it's covered up, it's out of sight. According to the law of object permanence, it's vanished. It no longer exists. Now, children that master that will know to go out and seek. They'll look around, they'll explore the space. They know that they can use their hands at this age. Right now, this child probably doesn't fully understand that she can manipulate the environment. She can move those towels around to sort of look at it. She's confused, right? So that's object permanence. Okay. All right. Any questions on the?
Two rows of quarters.
Now I got to find. Oh, that's going to be our next one. All right. Any questions on sensory motor stage before we move on? Okay. Kind of get a sense for it, right? That's where they're starting to manipulate their environment. They're learning to manipulate their environment. Okay. So the next stage that we're going to cover is the pre-operational stage. Now, the pre-operational stage, it'll make a little bit more sense. I think it's a little backwards. We should describe what operations are before we get into pre-operations. So this stage happens from around 2 to 6 years of age, and where they're starting to develop that mental representation of things, right? They still haven't mastered the ability to think abstractly. They're not really able to test hypotheses. Like if they're developing hypotheses and they're, like, what would happen if I do this? They're still learning like law of conservation at this stage. So they're not really at the actual operational stage yet, which is the reason that why they call it pre-operational. But they lack logical reasoning. They are still really, they haven't really accepted that things exist and people's feelings exist outside of themselves, right? Because they're still learning to grasp their own mental development. So when I'll give you an example. Say Billy has a favorite flavor of ice cream, okay? And I asked Billy, "What's your favorite ice cream?" And he says chocolate chip or chocolate chip mint. And then I said, "Okay, what's my favorite ice cream?" What do you think his response would be if he's in the egocentrism stage? Right. Why would that make sense? Why would that be logical to Billy? Right, that's my favorite, so it's everybody's favorite, and you can really test that with children. Maybe they like red trucks, for example, and they might think that their friend also likes red trucks, and they don't understand why they don't, right? Because they're very not aware that other people have thoughts and emotions that are different from them. Okay, so one of the tests that Piaget used was the law of conservation. And we can really tell when children have mastered the law of conservation, when they know that again, we're as little scientists, we're experimenting. We know that as adults, we know this anyway, that mass just doesn't disappear, right? It goes somewhere, it might transition, but for the most part, the mass of an object is always intact. But children don't understand that. So they think in terms of size and they think in terms of distance as being greater or being more. And that's really what we see with operations. So somebody that's able to master operations will understand some of these physics that we're talking about. Children in the pre-operational stage haven't quite mastered that yet. And I'll give you another video with an example of a child who is still stuck in pre-operational stage, excuse me.
My job is to make college easier because students have a lot of two regular quarters. Does this row have more quarters?
Turn off the lights.
The same? Okay. Wow.
Okay, so he can count. He can kind of see that they're identical or similar.
Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
Okay, so what's going on there?
He sees that there's a distance and now the road is big.
Right, it looks bigger, right? Even though he can count, he was able to count, say that there were 5 there, and when they're together, they look the same. But now that they're spread out, you know, we can see that he feels that it's a larger amount. I actually, you know, when I see this, it reminds me, because I have kids. My son and my daughter got into an argument because I had cut my daughter's pizza up a little bit, and my son was irate. He was angry because he thought, what? She had more. It was the exact same slice. I just cut hers up. So to remedy it, you know, obviously I had to cut his up just to make it seem like it was a little bit more fair. But that's really the thought that goes through their mind, is because it's bigger, because it's more spread out, or because there might be more individual pieces, it's more, and that's a fault in their logic.
Because it's flexed out. Because it's stretched out? Yeah. Okay, so how many are in this room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, how many are in this room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Let's see.
So, are there more in this row, or are they the same? The same. The same? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So even when she challenges him, he still sticks by it, right?
Longer? Is this stick longer, or are they the same? The same. What about now? Is this stick longer? Is this stick longer, or are they the same? That stick is longer. The stick is longer? Yeah. Can you tell me why? Because you moved it over. So now it's longer? Yeah. Okay. Tell me. I'm going to pour blue water into each of these cups, and you're going to have to tell me when they have the same amount. Okay. Tell me when it's the same. The same. The same? Those two are the same now? Yeah. Okay.
The official measurement.
Good. Okay, now watch this. We're going to take the blue water from this glass, and we're going to pour it into this glass. Now, does this glass have more water? Does this glass have more water, or are they the same? Has more water. This one has more water? Can you tell me why? Because that one's higher than that.
See, that fault in the logic is it's higher, it's bigger, it's longer. It means it's more.
Have more Play-Doh? Does this all have more Play-Doh, or are they the same? That has more Play-Doh. That one has more? Yeah. Let's try and make them the same. Make them two of the same size.
I think it's kind of cool how she has him say what is the same and what's different.
Yeah. They're the same. They're the same now? Yeah. Okay, now watch. Now, does this one have more Play-Doh? Does this one have more Play-Doh, or are they the same? That one has more Play-Doh. That one has more Play-Doh? Can you tell me why? It's more stacked. Because that one's smushed. How about? How about now? Does this one have more Play-Doh? Does this one have more Play-Doh, or are they the same?
The same.
Now they're the same.
All right. That's it. So,
The one with that was extra.
Okay, great.
so these are just experiments that Piaget helped to develop
Did we check
for the
that?
law of conservation. Let me get out of this. So you get a pretty good sense of what law of conservation is, right? All right. So back to, all right. So that's essentially what we're looking at with pre-operational stages. They haven't mastered operations. They haven't developed that keen sense of physics and how things work as far as nature goes. So the next stage that we go into is the concrete operational stage. Okay, so this is where they have mastered law of conservation. This is where they are aware that when things disappear, they're not gone. They haven't left existence, but they might be somewhere else, and they'll start to use these stages to start searching for where they might be. Okay, so concrete operational stage happens from around 7 to 11 years of age, and they understand physics, they understand science a little bit better. They're able to kind of wrap their mind around analogies. So for example, if I say an apple to a banana is like, oh, I forgot how analogies work. An apple to a banana is like a tomato to a what? What would a cucumber, right? Right, exactly. So you kind of have the concept of size and shape, and then you're just taking that one step further. You're stepping outside of what you know to explore things that you don't know and applying that reasoning to that. And that's what we really see happening in concrete operational stage. And then when we go further into the formal operational stage, they start expanding a little bit more abstractly, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But did I talk about egocentrism yet? I didn't get into egocentrism yet. So I meant to go back. Let me go back. So egocentrism. Oh, I did talk about that. Never mind. All right. So they're in the concrete operational stage. They're venturing out. They understand analogies, but they haven't really developed their abstract thinking and moral reasoning yet. Okay. And then formal operational stage. This is kind of where we develop into who we are today, right? Because this stage happens right around 12 years old. Again, some kids sooner, some kids much later, but they're able to start thinking abstractly. They're able to think hypothetically. So again, if we're able to ride a bicycle, I think the next stage would be to apply what we know from balancing and using our feet and handlebar movements and all that. We might try to apply that to some other two-wheeled device, like maybe a motorcycle or a unicycle even, right? So we expand what we know, what we've done with our experimentation, and again, it just branches off into other areas that we're trying to think of or trying to develop. And let's see, I've got a video for this. So when I say moral reasoning, what do you think I mean by that? How do we develop morally?
If you hit a bullet,
I'm gonna get like our moral lesson from
Okay.
like our parents and like how we think and what we think is bad is good.
Okay. Well, how we view things as bad as how we view things as bad and good. Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if it just comes like the situation that you're in, and just believe it's good and bad.
Okay. Well, in the formal stages of development here, the formal operational stage, we start thinking morally. We start thinking of what's good and bad. Like for example, if we'll go back to Billy. Billy's always in trouble. So Billy likes to doodle on his homework assignments, and the teacher tells him, "I don't want you to do that again, or there's going to be consequences." What do you think Billy's natural instinct is to do?
Be upset.
Be upset, probably not do it again, right? Not do it when?
When he just,
When the teacher looks at it, right? So in Billy's mind, he's only going to do what's right so he doesn't get in trouble. And when somebody's looking and somebody's watching, and when we get into reinforcement, I'm going to talk a lot more about punishment, okay? Because punishment is only as good as when it's consistent and when the individual receiving that punishment understands that, again, kind of fans out into other areas. We have to do what's right even when people aren't watching us, okay? But children in the earlier stages don't really get that. They kind of just understand that I'm only going to do what's right until somebody's not watching, and then I'm going to do what I want to do. Okay, and that happens a lot. We see that a lot. We see kids sneaking around. We see them maybe telling fibs or lying, right? Because they don't want to get into trouble. So formal operational stages is where they're really developing that moral reasoning of what's right and wrong. I'm going to wash my hands every time I go to the bathroom because that's the right thing to do. Not just when somebody's watching me. And we're going to talk a lot more about that when we get into Lawrence Kohlberg's moral development. Okay. So anyway, so this is an example of two individuals, a child and an adolescent, who one has not mastered not moral reasoning, deductive reasoning. The other one has.
With a hammer, the glass will break. And then this one says, Don hit a glass with a hammer. So what happened to the glass? It broke. It broke. Why did it break? Because the gun was hard. If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break. No. And this is the second rule. Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass? Nothing. Nothing happened. Why didn't anything happen? Because it fell flat.
Okay, so what kind of reasoning was he using?
that the feather was soft, so it was not possible to break the glass.
Right. He couldn't break outside of his pattern of thought, even given a certain set of rules that if this happens, this will result. Right. So she gave him those rules and those principles, and he still didn't really catch on to that. Somebody tricked me with this when I was younger. What weighs more, a ton of bricks or a ton of feathers?
I think it's like the ton of feathers.
What's that?
The ton of feathers.
A ton of feathers weighs more than a ton of bricks? What do you think? Okay, because why? A ton's a ton, right? Because where the question is, I'm not picking on you. Trust me, it tripped me up too. But you have to think about it, right? The question is, how much does one weigh more than the other? If they're both the exact same weight, right? So it's kind of a trick question. So anyway, that's an example of deductive reasoning, and he was given a certain set of rules, and he wasn't able to think outside of that based on what he has come to learn going through these stages himself. All right, and then finally,
a glass with a feather, the glass will break. And the second one, Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass? It broke.
Right.
And why did it break? Because it was good. If you hit on the feather, break. Because we hit the feather, broke.
Okay, so somebody that's mastered formal operations and deductive reasoning they understand that. Okay, they're able to break outside of that thinking. All right, so what I'd like to do here is just kind of see how you're grasping this. We're going to do a little quick activity here. We don't necessarily have to go through all 7 of these, but just to kind of get a sense of how you wrap your mind around these. And the reason I start off with Piaget is a good starting point for how the rest of these other theorists go, because like I said, it's really confined to birth to late adolescence, and nothing really, Piaget doesn't really cover much beyond that, but some of the other ones pick up where he leaves off. And Freud, which I think your book mentions, we're not going to talk about, had a very similar concept, and he kind of theorized these in different stages and more or less sexualized it, but which isn't something that we really accept today. as being a truth or scientific. But anyway, it was very similar to what Piaget had proposed as well. All right, so let's see how we do. All right, so I'll tell you what, we'll take turns reading. If one of you want to read it aloud.
When asked what to say, lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. The tree said that it meant that find someone with an opportunity, but doesn't necessarily mean that they
Okay. So when looking at that example, what stage of operation will we be considering if somebody was able to wrap their mind around that concept? Let's kind of break this down a little bit. So if I told a child, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, what do you think that child's going to think? You think he's going to come up with the same conclusion that Patrice did?
Unless it was over.
Okay, why not?
Because it's not like actual literal anything. It's like I guess it'd be abstract.
Right, right. Which is what stage of development would you say?
The formal operation stage.
Absolutely. Did you get that? That makes sense. Okay. So again, a child who has not mastered formal operation is not going to be able to think hypothetically and not well, that's really abstract. Not think abstractly and consider that that phrase, a set of words, can mean something different than other than a horse being parched and wanting to have a drink. Okay. All right, let's try another one. All right, Matt, you want to take this one?
Some brothers go trick or treating one house. They went to the same houses and got exactly the same candy at each house. Yet, by the time the evening was over, Reggie was very upset because his bag was bigger than his brother's. It didn't seem that he had as much candy.
Okay. All right, what do we have going on here, do you think?
Probably the pre-operation.
Okay, why?
Because he thinks that since the bag is bigger, that it doesn't have much candy.
Right, right. We're kind of going back to that law of conservation, right? Where just because it looks like it's more doesn't necessarily mean it's more. But to a child, that might mean something a little bit different. They think it's the size matters, right? The volume matters, the length matters, right? All right, good job. All right, Alexis, you want to do this one? No, I'm sorry.
Andrea and her younger sister are playing with the coins for their comfort of each other. Each of them during a recent visit. While they were playing, Andrea proposed a trade. She would give her little sister a good coin and then teach her a dime. The sister agreed just as Andrea thought she would. She's pretty sure that sister didn't understand that dime was before them.
Okay, okay,
That'd be probably the pre-operation.
okay. Concrete operational. Andrea, her younger sister. Oh, so this is talking about Andrea, okay, Andrea. Let's talk about Andrea, not her younger sister. Okay, but you're right. If it was younger sister, her older sister, Andrea, understands that her younger sister probably doesn't understand concrete operation. So this is talking about Andrea. She was pretty sure that her sister didn't understand that a dime is worth more than. So Andrea, okay, that makes sense. That caught me off guard. I had to think of that one. All right, do you get that? Does that make sense? Okay. So Andrea was conducting an experiment, tricking her little sister. All right, let's do one more. Okay. What do you think? Okay. Why? Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Because once it disappeared, it vanished into thin air, right? It no longer existed. So Bryce was, it's a shame Bryce isn't here today. We could have picked on him a little bit. But he didn't understand that when it goes away, he should seek it out and find it. Okay. All right, y'all get it? Is it kind of gelling for you? Okay, so I'm gonna flip through these. So there are some limitations that we do know of Piaget. And there have been a lot of researchers that have, I don't want to say debunked, but kind of further understood, like object permanence, for example. We think that object permanence actually happens a lot earlier than 0 to 2 years old. Like 2 years not being necessarily the limit, but they start doing this on a continuous level, not necessarily in stages. So children might be able to think in certain terms. Again, when we look at domain specific, like logic and math versus language and reasoning, these areas might develop a little bit differently. So where they may understand physics in math, they may not understand the principles of language and communication just yet, if that makes sense. So we do know that development is probably a little bit more continuous, more on the continuous as opposed to stages that Piaget proposed. His tests were high task demands, which meant that it required a lot of focus for the child. And when we do, what further experimentation has shown is that children that have less high task demands in front of them, they're able to kind of focus in other areas and think a little bit more reasonably. So there are a lot of there's a lot of give and take with what he proposed, but we do know that what he was observing were high task demands. His theories, and I thought this was interesting, were really based on his 3 children. Okay, and if you think about that, he has developed a whole subset of psychology based on the observation of his own 3 children, which I think is pretty remarkable. But it's not very scientific, right? He didn't. This has been replicated over cultures and over time, and there is some truth to it. But for the most part, it was very rudimentary in that he was just looking at his own 3 children when he developed some of these theories. Okay, did you have any questions? How do you feel about stages of development? If you're going to go into education, or you're going to go into any kind of child care or child development or something, this is going to come back again. You're going to see this a lot, because we do base a lot of our learning models on where children are, kind of meeting them at their level to take them to the next level. And Vygotsky kind of talks about that too, which hopefully I think we're going to have time on Wednesday to talk about. All right. There are no other questions. We have our quiz this Sunday. I think we have. We don't have a movie review or article review this week. Right? Okay. So we have next movie, I believe, is In and Out. Do you remember? Oh, is that the next one? Okay. Yeah. So that'll be next week, next Wednesday. I'm going to send out. Actually, I sent out an email on that. I'm going to send out a flyer to everybody. So if you want to attend, you're more than welcome. Bring popcorn, bring your friend. Just make sure you clean it up afterwards. All right. Nothing else. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you here on Wednesday. Yep, you too, Matt. I forgot what it's like to be nervous. How'd it go?
So there's a form filling out with sort of feedback. You and I had a conversation about it in terms of like what it means,